Dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of eLaw, the Center for Law and Digital Technologies here at Leiden University, I would like to welcome you all to the annual Hans Franken lecture and the eLaw conference on law and AI and data protection. And a special welcome to Professor Hans Franken, here seated at the front row, as our guest of honor for today. And of course, also a special welcome for our distinguished speaker, Professor Brownsword. It's great to see so many people in the audience today, and we have many more people actually joining us online via the live stream. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bart Kusters. I'm the director of eLaw, the Center for Law and Digital Technologies, and I'm professor of law and data science here at the Leiden Law School. This year, we decided to combine the Hans Franken lecture with a conference on AI and data protection to mark the 10th anniversary of our advanced master program on law and digital technologies. It is 10 years ago that Professor Simone van der Hof, here at the front row, established this program. And since then, we have been welcoming and educating students from across the world. And just recently, our new program director, Francine Dechaine, successfully guided the program through a re-accreditation process. We had an excellent evaluation, and our program is more popular than ever. And currently, we have a record number of 55 students from about 20 countries, and some of them are here actually also today to join this conference. Apart from this flagship program, we have also started a new minor program this year on cybercrime and cybersecurity, and this program will be transformed into a full bachelor program next year with an expected 400 new students. And in terms of research, our institute has landed several new projects last year, including the EU project Better Internet for Kids and the NWO project ReSocial on vulnerabilities of people online. And also our ERC project, Safe and Sound, is now in full swing with full staffed. Also worth mentioning is that the last few months in this building we had the successful PhD defense of 4 of our candidates, PhD candidates, and in September 2 more will follow. Due to all these developments in education and research, our department has significantly grown over the last year, and actually we hired 11 new staff members over the last year only. We're still filling some vacancies. And to mark all this, and especially this 10th anniversary of our program, we have organized this 2-day conference today and tomorrow, with several lectures, panels, and paper sessions. And on Saturday, we also have an alumni event for our former students and former staff members. And since our faculty building is now under renovation, we are located in this building with several sessions, but also in the building in the city center. But don't worry, that's only 200 meters from here, so it's only a 2-minute walk. Well, before we go to the Hans Franken lecture by Professor Brownsword, I would like to shortly give the floor to my colleague Gian Claudio Malgeri, because he has been the driving force behind this organization of this whole event. He will offer you some more details about today's conference and practicalities, and after that, I'll introduce our distinguished lecturer for today. So, floor is yours first.
Thank you very much, Bart. So it's a great honor and emotions to see this full room, also in a day of great competition of other events, because there's the European Data Protection Supervisor 20th anniversary today, but you're all here, so we are very proud. So I'm just complementing something that Bart was already mentioning and explaining some technicalities or details about the spirit and content of this conference. So first of all, as Bart was already mentioning, this is a pilot. This is the first time we organized the eLaw conference. We have, as you could see in the brochure, we have so many ongoing projects, events, educational activities. We thought it's a good moment to celebrate. So this is the spirit behind this first conference, celebrating, reflecting, and studying for the next steps, together with bright minds, senior and junior researchers. As a first experiment, we also decided to be totally sponsorless, which is important in law and technology conferences. And this was even a more important challenge for us. So, starting from the title, Law and versus Technology, I think this is something we were wondering a lot in the last... everybody defining themselves as a professor of law and technology might focus a lot on law or technology. Today, we want to focus on the and. Law and technology, law or technology, law versus technology. And I think the 3 panels that we will have in these 2 days, the plenary panels, will try to disentangle this concept. After the Hans Franken lecture by Roger Brownsword, there will be a panel that will try to develop exactly the link between law and technology, governance of technology, imperfect governance, discontent. So I'm just dropping some keynotes, some spoilers. And tomorrow we have other 2 plenary sessions that will try also to disentangle this concept from other perspectives. We have technology beyond law, in which we try, with different expertise and different backgrounds, from neuroethics, social legal robotics, computer science, human-computer interaction, etc., to analyze the legal discussion from those different perspectives. And the last one will be, of course, about data and AI governance, which are the 2 driving topics and fields also of eLaw. So, in addition to that, the program, as you will see, has paper sessions, so parallel sessions. We will start with 2 parallel sessions this afternoon. First, we have 3 papers and 3 papers in parallel in 2 rooms. The other room of today is Saal 2, we call it, so room 2, which is ground floor. And you can follow the arrows, and Leiden Law Academy will help us to show you the way. And after that, we have another couple of panels. One will be always in this room, and the others will be in the room that are indicated here, including the law. When you see law board room, it means the other building, the building where you had the registration. So you can already look at the program and see what's the topic that you like the most in terms of papers and decide. Tomorrow will be the same, so we will have parallel sessions. So you saw this nice booklet, but there are some updates, as you could imagine. There are always last-minute cancellation, etc. You know, I work, maybe some of you know, I work on vulnerability. The other word is resilience. We should be resilient also for programs. And the resilience is this QR code. So please scan the QR code to see updates. I can just give a couple of spoilers about the updates. One is that tomorrow we have an additional speaker in the first plenary panel. We will have Mireille Hildebrand, that was not in this program because she initially cancelled. She will be online, but she will be with us. And there is also a small change in terms of one paper, and also the locations are updated for lunches and for reception and for coffee break. Because here we wrote just Academy Building. On the updated program, you see exactly where. So let me see if I forgot something. I think, yeah, maybe just one final thing about the spirit of the workshop sessions. We tried to get inspirations from PLSC, Privacy Law Scholarship Conference, and other existing conferences, great conferences also in the Netherlands in this field, like Amsterdam Privacy Conference or Tilting, etc. The idea is that all presenters have already submitted their abstract. There was a very strict selection. We were very proud to receive 146 abstracts. For the first edition, it was extremely satisfying. We were very impressed. We could select just 40 papers because we have limited room, and we wanted to give at least 30 time to every paper, 30 minutes to every paper. So this was a choice. So the presenters are very, very good presenters because they were selected one out of 3. So there will be a commentator for every paper. So we will have 10-15 minutes presentation from the paper presenter, and then we will have 10-15 minutes comment from a commentator that can be the moderator or another volunteer. And so I already want to thank the moderators and commentators, but also the authors. And then there's final time for Q&A for every paper session. The idea is to give constructive feedbacks. The papers are available if you ask, and just to say that these constructive feedbacks are part of the academic discussion. So we want them to be very frank, the Dutch way, but also constructive. So if you have something to ask or to say, and it's kind, it's better. Okay, so I think now it's really whole, and just maybe this final sentence to thank eLaw, our pre-PhD students, so the assistants, Leiden Law Academy, the whole board of eLaw that made this possible, and also the Browser Privacy Hub and Computer Law Security Review and Data Protection Scholar Network, who are all partners today. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, of course, regarding practicalities, Jan Claudio is around, but we have a lot of staff people helping us out here. Okay, well, this brings me to our special guest for today. We are very pleased to welcome Professor Roger Brownsword for the 2024 Hans Franken Lecture. Professor Brownsword is a graduate from the London School of Economics and has been an academic lawyer for some 50 years, first at the University of Sheffield and then at King's College London. He has published more than 250 book chapters and articles and about 25 books. And today he will talk about his latest book, which is on laws in perfect governance. Well, with this introduction, I would like to give the floor to our distinguished speaker. So please come up here.
So, thanks very much indeed, Bart. And I've got to say, it's a great pleasure, privilege to be giving this Hans Franken lecture. I think this is the 5th lecture in the series. The series is of relatively recent origin, but of course there are threads of connection that go right back into the 1980s when Hans was one of the driving forces, I think, in the foundation of the law and digital technologies centre, eLaw. Now, if we go back, at least in my experience, to the 1980s, it was very difficult indeed, very rare to come across a lawyer who took any interest at all in emerging technologies. You know, technology was for technologists, law was for lawyers. They were distinct disciplines, distinct spheres of interest. And I often say that if someone had the bright idea that we should bring lawyers and technologists together at some kind of dinner party so they might have a conversation about their intersecting interests, there wouldn't be much intersection. You know, there wouldn't be much conversation. They were just not ready for it. Today, the situation is radically different. I'd say almost through 180 degrees different. Do you know any lawyers today who would say, oh, you know, in a Frank Easterbrook kind of way, oh, you don't need to take technology seriously? No, I don't think you would. Lawyers today recognize that new developments in technology are salient and significant for us as lawyers. Okay, so we are in a very different place. And there's a quite remarkable, I think, arc of development from the 1980s through to where we are today. Things have turned around dramatically. So I could have given a lecture in the 1980s on the topic of laws in perfect governance. I could have given a lecture, but it would have been a lecture that was entirely about law and its imperfections. Technology would not have figured at all. The lecture I give you today will also be about law and its imperfections, but technology is at least as much a part of the lecture I give today. So we're in a very different place, very different time. And one of the things I want to suggest is that we've got this 4 decades of development, which I think forms a very impressive arc of development. But I wonder whether we're at the beginning stage of a new arc of development in the field of law tech. Okay, and I'll try and indicate how that might go, because the lecture will take the form of 5 conversations that I will be introducing, 5 conversations, 5 points for discussion, which I think might be pointers to the way that this new arc, if it is to form, will form. And these conversation points are, broadly speaking, about governance projects, about governance problems and responses, and about governance prospects. So, whoops. I try and get the right. Yeah, I was guaranteed this. Oh, there we are. Now, sorry, let me just get the 5 conversations up so you can just. These are the 5 conversations that I will be introducing. They draw on the book that Bart mentioned. But they also anticipate where I think I'll be going in the next book. And I must emphasize that these are just introductions. These are not like short stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. They're just conversation starters, okay? And these are conversations about governance projects like law as a governance project, like technology as a governance project. They're about problems, like the discontent we have with these projects. They're about responses, such as respect, the need for respect. And they're about the prospects for governance, whether we're talking about laws governance or technologies governance or market governance, any kind of governance. What are the prospects? So, okay, projects, problems, prospects. That's what we're talking about. And the first conversation, let's get a bit more of that. Yeah, the first conversation, insofar as anything's methodological, this is it. And I should just say that in a very kind of amateurish way, I think methodologically about what we do in law tech in the following way, that there's a field of interest, and we're very inclusive, I think, in law tech in what can come within this ballpark of potential interest. We haven't got down to any kind of theorizing yet. It's just, oh yeah, this is a matter of some interest. It could be from law, it could be from technology. We're very Catholic about this, I think. You know, we want to build this field of interest, so we're not going to say, oh, no, you know, it's exclusive. I think it's very inclusive. But, of course, the price you pay for that inclusivity is that some people will say, I just don't think this is coherent. I mean, like, you know, Lyria Bennett Moses would say, why should we be interested in microwaves? You know, what's going on here? No. But we are inclusive at that stage. The field is encompassing. But then we get to the serious business of trying to put some order into this and shape and structure to the questions we want to ask, where at this stage we are framing. We have the field, but we now frame it in some sort of way. And the natural way for lawyers to frame their interest is through the law, because that's what they know. It might be a general kind of framing, or it might be a more particular framing, like I'll admit a lot of interest will come from intellectual property lawyers, who will be framing their interests through the lens of patents and copyright and trademarks or whatever other IP stuff they might be interested in. And then we get down to the business of identifying the focus, the particular focal points for our interests. So, it's, you know, this is what's going on. We have a field of interest. We frame it in a certain, our inquiry in a certain sort of way. And then we have a focus for those particular inquiries we want to make. Now, what I'm interested in here, really, is the framing question. How do we, as lawyers, frame our interest in law tech, or law and technology? And the natural way for us as lawyers to frame our interests is the way that I think Hans framed the mission for the Research Centre back in the 1980s. Well, our interest there was in law and information technology, or law and computers, or law and digital technology, something like that. Okay, law and some specified technology. Now, in my case, I didn't get into this game at all until the 1990s, but it was biotechnology that was my point of entry. So I would say, if you asked me in the 1990s, I'm interested in law and emerging biotechnologies, you know. And so I think until we get to the turn of the century, most times people who, and there are not many people in the field at that stage, but we're all saying, oh yes, we're interested in law and this particular this particular stream of technology, mainly information and communication technology and biotech, I think, at that stage, but with nanotech and neurotech soon to come into the picture. Or it might have been more particular, you know, it might have been like I would say, I edited a collection on law and human genetics in the late 1990s. That would, again, be all typical of this way of framing it. Okay. As a lawyer, I've got my base in law. I'm looking out there and reacting to these developments that technologists are bringing to our attention. Some engage our interests, some don't. You know, you got the picture. Okay. Now, sometimes, as in the case of biotech, ethics also seems to be part of the framing, because it's hard. I mean, at that time, it was hard to discuss what the legal position should be in relation to, research using human embryos, like stem cell research or something of that kind, without also getting into bioethics. So the game there was, or the framing was largely in terms of triangulating law and bioethics and the relevant technologies. Okay, but again, it would be, if you were starting with ethics or law and ethics, that would be the platform. You'd be looking out at what was going on in the technological field and reacting to it. Now, in the early years of, or maybe even before, of the present century, it seems to me that regulation suddenly makes its presence felt. When we started our tech centre in King's College in London in 2007, I mean, it took 2 or 3 years to set it up and to recruit. Excuse me. But I said to the then Dean of the Law School in London, the number one priority was to appoint someone with from a regulatory background. We needed someone with, who knew regulation. They didn't have to be people who'd been interested in regulation of technology or anything of that kind, but they needed to know their way around the regulatory literature. And we were fortunate to appoint Karen Young, who, unlike most regulatory people, was not just interested in what works and what's effective, but also in what's legitimate and what can be, defended. So regulation now gets into the framing in some way. And so the Oxford Handbook that Karen and I and Eloise Scotford co-edited some years later is the Oxford Handbook on Law, Regulation and Technology. So you might say, okay, if you're looking at the kind of work that was being done in Brussels, then we understand why regulation has to be in this framing, because although the judicial branch plays a part in responding to legal questions raised by these new technological developments and, where they might be seen to be harmful in some way, as some claims being made, the practice generally, not just in Brussels but also in London, I would say, is for the political branch to take the lead in putting in place an overarching kind of regulatory framework. Well, I've already used the word there, an overarching framework for these particular technologies. So, the general data protection regulation, the AI law that we now have, but all the e-commerce stuff back at the early years of the century, that's all trying to lay out a comprehensive kind of legal framework, regulatory framework. It's political work. Okay, so it's policy orientated, and I say in the European Union, very conspicuously linked to the policy objectives and priorities of the Union. Okay, so it's quite different to what's going on in the courts, where the judicial branch is not thinking in these policy terms at all. It's much more guided by historic principles and consistency, and in the common law world, the precedents. So, it's understandable a regulation should be in there as part of the frame. But it's also something else going on here, which is that in 1999, Lawrence Lessig seminally made us aware that the coding of hardware and software can achieve regulatory effects, and that design of products and processes can be critical in channeling, dictating which practical options are available to people, like architecture, like all sorts of things. There are ways of constructing environments or processes within those environments which limit the options that people have available. So digital rights management limits the practical options you have available. I mean, there might be contract provisions, there might be IP provisions, rules as well. But the point is, if you can't actually play the DVD when you get it back to the UK, as I found out myself once when I bought a DVD out in Singapore, well, you can't. And there's a difference between you ought not to do this, or you're required or prohibited, and I can't. You can't. If you can't, you can't. If the door's locked, you can't get out. It doesn't matter whether the rule says you can or cannot. So this idea that regulation also needs to be considered in the way of technology operating as a regulatory instrument gets onto the agenda. And so when we launched our centre in London in 2007, the launch conference was under the title Regulating Technologies, which had this double meaning. One half of the conference was about putting in place regulatory frameworks for the technologies which were then up and coming. The other half of the conference was about thinking about the way tools that we already had, like DNA profiling, for example, in the criminal justice system, or the coding of hardware and software. These tools could be deployed for regulatory purposes, and what the implications of that were. Because in the first half, where we're talking about the regulatory frameworks to be put in place to cover these technologies, law is doing the regulatory work, and it's doing it through rules and principles and standards. Whereas in the second part of this, where we're talking about the technologies themselves undertaking regulatory functions, it's not legal rules. It's a different approach. It's a different style of regulation. It's a different project. Right, so now I could in those days talk quite easily about the regulatory environment being the way I was framing my questions, but the way I'd like to... Sorry, I just had to go back one there. Oh. Yeah, in the books I've been writing recently, you'll see all the time the governance comes out of nowhere to become the frame for our thinking. Governance appears, as the headline consideration. Well, once upon a time, if you'd asked me how I understood governance, I would have said, well, there's law, there's regulation, and there's governance. They're kind of in the same family, but they occupy distinct conceptual spaces, and different people will specify those conceptual spaces in their own particular ways. Law is one thing, regulation is something else, and governance is something else again. But I want to get away from that and say we shouldn't be contrasting governance with law and with regulation, but regarding governance in a broad and functional way as something that all human groups need to have if they are to have any prospects of being viable. Okay? Communities of humans can't live together, groups can't flourish without governance. They need governance. And the governance might be provided by a law-like form of governance, or it might be provided by an ethical form of governance, or markets. But there are all sorts of forms of governance, styles of governance that might be available. Technology is also a way of governing. So we don't have to strain it with questions like, is code law? The kind of question that after lezing people say, well, yeah, but is code really law? No, code is not law, but that doesn't mean to say that we should ignore code, because if you understand now governance as the platform from which we're viewing these phenomena, then they are in the same field of phenomena. They are cognate phenomena. They're both modes of governance. Law is not the only governance game in town, in other words. Okay? Technology is a possibility too. And part of what I'm going to say today is that we've got a big tension brewing between law's human-centric style mode of governance, rule-based governance, and the style that we get from an out-and-out technocentric kind of approach. Okay, but the methodological point here is that in the next arc of development, instead of thinking as lawyers from a law base and looking out there at technology, we'll start from a base of governance, and we'll be thinking about different modes of governance, and good governance will become our aspiration rather than sort of compliance with the rule of law, which is an aspiration that's specific to law-like governance. Okay, so to move on, you see there that we can regard law, ethics, and technology as governance projects. Yeah, okay. I'm going to skip over the governance matrix. I'm sorry to miss that, but that was something. If the conversation had continued, this is the first conversation I've got 4 more to introduce. I would be saying something about this, but now quickly on to the second conversation, which is the main conversation in the book there that's on the screen. And there are 3 things that we could talk about here. One is the range of discontent. A second thing is the roots of that discontent. And a third thing is the ways in which technology amplifies or assuages our discontent. I said in the introductory remarks that I could have given a lecture on law's imperfect governance back in the 1980s, but it wouldn't have featured this third point about tech. It would have been kind of good old-fashioned discontent with the law. And the kind of things that people, well, there's all sorts of things. I mean, a laundry list on there is, I don't know how the Russia-Ukraine conflict will come out, but there will probably be people in some parts of Ukraine who will, for one reason or another, reject the authority of whoever is claiming to be the lawmakers for that part of Europe. But, I mean, so we can have all sorts of discontent with authority claims. We can be discontent with the promise that law makes in relation to order or democracy or justice. We can think it promises too little or promises too much. We think its performance is not satisfactory, doesn't deliver on its promises, or doesn't deliver on what we think it should be promising. The positions and policies that law takes up, again, might not be the ones we would vote for, not ones we'd favour, and be discontent with law on that account. Or it could be, and often is, that lawyers are the butt of our criticism, that we are discontent with lawyers. We think they're a pretty poor bunch, you know, that they could do better, not models. Okay. Well, why is this? And the roots of our discontent can be traced to a number of factors. The first of which is that law is a quintessentially human enterprise. Humans aren't perfect. It's no surprise that law mirrors our human imperfections. I mean, whether you're looking at those who govern, as humans, they're capable of being corrupted, they're capable of being captured, they're capable of being compromised, lacking with, acting without integrity. On the side of those who are governed, they too are opportunists. So, between the two of them, it's not surprising that we got a recipe for discontent here. Law's not perfect. As long as it's a human enterprise, it's not going to deliver a perfectly mechanical kind of order. And then there are rules, or principles, or standards. Rules are the hardest kind of bright line, sharpest edged instruments we have in law. You think if we've got a chance of getting people to do things, we need rules rather than vague standards or principles. But rules, lawyers are great at finding the leeway, the open texture in the way a rule's formulated. They can find ambiguity where we thought there was none. That's not the real point, though. The real point is that the rules simply say this is what you ought to do. It's a kind of request. I mean, we don't think that compliance is voluntary. It's not optional. But in the end, even with very heavy-handed policing or enforcement, the rules and compliance are at our option. It's up to us whether we do comply. Okay, unlike, to go back to what I was saying before about architecture and design and that sort of thing, a technological approach that tries to manage the risks by designing in or embedding the regulatory controls that it wants to put in place. A rule-reliant approach is always going to be an invitation for opportunists to take the opportunity. And the technocentric approach is trying to reduce the number of opportunities we have to act opportunistically. Yeah. Okay. Now, something that struck me while I was writing this last book that I hadn't really appreciated before was just how challenging technologies are where we are transitioning from one kind of technological order to another. And the problem that legislators have in keeping pace with or connecting to fast-moving technologies is well known. That's not quite the problem I'm trying to identify. It's something rather different. It's a difference between law's governance in a stable, relatively stable context, and law trying to deal with the dynamic, turbulent, and disruptive sort of circumstances we find where technologies are coming at us thick and fast. Breakthroughs are being made here, there, and everywhere. Now, if you have a stable setting, if you have a relatively homogeneous group of people with the same kind of values and priorities, and if they're all basically committed to the idea that we need governance, then law's got pretty good prospects because there will be deviations, there will be acts, there will be infringements, there will be wrong done, the rules will be broken. But law's job is law's job is to try to correct back to the baseline. Those who've been harmed, or the community that's been harmed, in some way or other, we will try to get back to where we were and things, the law's role here is to manage things in a way that they don't change, that we have a steady state. But where communities are in transition, as we are at the moment, spectacularly, I would say, with AI, from one kind of technological world to another, from the analog world to the digital and now on to the AI-enabled world, law's job is to manage the tension between the interests that are vested in the old order and the interests that we have in what we see as a brave new world, where people want to move ahead to what they think will be a collectively beneficial situation. That's very challenging indeed. And, it chimes in with the thought that it's very difficult these days for law to get out ahead of the game. It's always on the back foot, reacting to these developments. Like, for example, with the AI law in the EU. I mean, when the Commission first published, the first draft of the AI law, ChatGPT and generative models of AI weren't, on the radar. They got onto the radar during, the passage of that legislation, so that the Parliament, when it got to make those hundreds of amendments to the AI bill, they had to take on board the developments with ChatGPT. But we know that continues to develop, and it's very difficult for by the time the law comes into effect in a couple of years' time. Who knows where AI will have got to, or whether there might be some other breakthrough technologies that are really impacting on this. Just don't know. So it's very difficult for law to manage these changes. It's complex. And it seems to me to be perfectly understandable. In those difficult conditions, there's going to be a lot of discontent. Also, in the ideal typical case I sketched, where you have relatively homogeneous people who are being governed and who are basically on board with the idea of governance, you don't have to contend with a plurality of views. But our modern societies are typically highly pluralistic. We all have our own views about what's in our interest, or in the collective interest. I mean, look at the UK. Even those people, when they voted on the Brexit referendum, even those who were thinking what will be collectively good prudential for the UK, they had very different views about what would work best for the UK. And when we get down to value questions, questions of principle, again, communities are badly divided. You just look at the way that the decision the US Supreme Court made when it overturned Roe and Wade on the abortion question. I mean, just how divisive, that had been, and, a new form of divisiveness was underlined there by the court. If you are trying to accommodate a plurality, again, you're going to be challenged, because you can't satisfy everybody. Yeah, and again, I mean, one thing that characteristic of law is that it tends to operate in a reactive way. The criminal law, it's true, does say these are the things that you're required not to do. These are prohibitions, and if you do these things, there will be penalties. So there is some sort of ex ante attempt to try to discourage these things, but it doesn't really kick into action until the crime has been committed. And if the crime is a serious crime, any kind of crime really, but it can't be rectified, really. It can't really be rectified. So, again, people will be discontent with that. Sorry. Yeah, I will pass over the ways in which technologies amplify, accentuate, aggravate, exacerbate these already existing discontent. But a point that is of general importance, I would say, is that we shouldn't think that the discontent that we have with the way governance engages with new technologies is sort of something completely fresh. It's building on a legacy of discontent, good old-fashioned discontent with law, even without technology in the frame to complicate things. Yeah, now moving on to the third conversation, I would say a few words about technology as itself a potential governance project. But I want to focus on it in a way that the technologists are trying to address head-on the roots of discontent with law. We're not messing about here. We are really going for the jugular. As technologists, we're saying, why is it there is this discontent with law? What do we really need to do to address it? And the answer is, we need to take humans out of the loop, because they're part of the problem. Humans are bugs, not features. Okay, we've got to get humans out of the loop. On the governance side, we can't have too many humans, in play, because they just get, as I've said, corrupted, captured, and all the rest of it, compromised. So we get humans out. So one spearhead is to automate processes in a way that humans are out of the loop. Okay? Remember, this is an out-and-out, unqualified technological sort of approach. There is no vestige here of thinking, well, this has to be human-centric and so on. We're going to, the aim is to get humans out of these loops. Well, of course, that still leaves humans in the loop on the governed side. Those who are governed are still populated by humans, and they're a problem there too, because, as I said, they are opportunistic. They tend to default to self-interest. Okay. So they do wrong. They abuse the privilege. And the technologist approach here will be spearheaded in a slightly different way, because now the problem is not so much the humans are a problem, but that the rules give them too much opportunity. The rules are an opportunity to do wrong. So we have to get rid of rules. We have to channel conduct. We have to contain conduct. We have to confine it, not by sending out rule signals or principles or standards in the way that law and ethics and religion do, but even backed by kind of threatening big sticks in the background and sanctions. No, we have to try and design things in a way that these practical opportunities are written out of the script, that they no longer exist. Get rid of the practical, or reduce the practical opportunities for wrongdoing. Risk management. And part and parcel of this would be that the technologists would say that this tendency to wait for the wrongdoing to happen, for the crime to be committed, for the torts to be committed, for the breach of contracts to take place. No. Get out there ahead, anticipate it, and try to prevent it, preclude these things happening. Richard Susskind, the leading figure in law and technology back in the UK on the practitioner side, says that it was so much better to have a fence at the top of the cliff than an ambulance waiting at the bottom. But the fences might be that's very simple technology. But the fencing might be more sophisticated kind of geofencing, or it might be through profiling. We're able to anticipate who are the high risks and take preventive action or preclusionary action ahead of them doing wrong. So in one way and another, these spearheads develop, all designed to try to correct for these root problems we have with law's governance. Of course, from the technological point of view, these root problems are regarded as problems. Whereas if you're a bit old-fashioned and you're kind of human-centric in your thinking, then you can say, no, you've got this exactly the wrong way around. These are the things that in the end make law's governance worthwhile. The virtue that we humans have in doing the right thing, even when we have the opportunity to do the wrong thing, is something we value. Trust is something we really value in human communities. All sorts of things like this, which you're going to just eliminate by this sort of brute technological solutionism. Okay, so I anticipate that in the coming decades, there is going to be a kind of an ongoing battle between two governance projects, one underpinned by human-centric law-like thinking, the other underpinned by more technological thinking, which now I don't suggest there's going to be a kind of a pitched battle at which it will be one side will prevail and the whole thing will be resolved. This will be an ongoing process, and much of it will not be kind of the extreme positions being pitted against one another. I think that the action is going to be more in the middle ground, where we're trying to accommodate and adjust and negotiate where we draw the lines. So, for example, in Article 22 of the GDPR, where we say, that where decisions have legal or other sort of equivalent significance, you can't have solely automated decision-making. That seems to me to be flagging up a jurisprudence to be developed. There's going to be contestation around how you interpret that, whether you're going to try and shift the line in some way, where the threshold is for, saying no to solely automated decision-making. So I see a constant battleground there, and I'm not at all clear which way that will go. Now, we get to the fourth conversation, and this is a conversation that actually draws on the book that was prior to the last one about respect for the law. It's a question that's always puzzled me, the demand that we should respect the law just because it is the law. Even though we have reservations, you should respect the law. Well, there may well be contexts where that is sound advice because the alternatives are truly awful, catastrophic. And respecting the law is definitely the better thing to do, prudentially and morally. But in civilized and relatively stable conditions, to say you should always respect the law just because it is the law doesn't seem to have a lot going for it. I mean, yes, of course, we might have some minor reservations. It might not be the position in the law that we would favour ourselves, but we understand we can't always have our views prevail. But it's such a strong demand, and if law doesn't come backed with any kind of moral credentials necessarily, then it seems difficult to justify this. So what I'm thinking about this now, though, from the perspective not so much of law and technology or law and governance projects, but from governance projects and with good governance as the kind of ideal or the aspiration that we strive for. I think the conversation could go forward by us talking about what we would expect if there were a culture of respect in place, a defensible culture of respect for governance, whether it's governance of law or governance of technology. What would it take? And it seems to me that it's not one-sided. It's not just that all the responsibilities lie with those who are doing the governing, although we tend to start with that. It's bilateral. Those who are governed also have responsibilities where we're trying to build a culture of respect. So, this is just an indicative list, as they say in the drafting of European directives. Often stuck in an appendix, isn't it? This is an indicative list of the kind of things you might want to stipulate or specify as being a desiderata for good governance. First of all, by those who are doing the governing. That, first of all, they should act with integrity. They should act with integrity, those who govern. They should act in the interests of their community. I would say they shouldn't prioritize efficiency and effectiveness over legitimacy. Indeed, I'd say the priority should be the other way around. You should start with what you can defend and then think about what works. I remember Mary Warnock at one of the first biotech conferences I went to saying, with human genetics now, there are all sorts of things we can do and that will work in delivering results that we want. But there is the question whether we ought to do these things morally. Are they the right things to do? Now, the next point is probably one of the most important points I can make, I think, that because we've got a blind spot for this. I expressed it there as good governance presupposes that those who govern maintain the conditions for viable governance of human communities. Now, these are what I'd call the foundational conditions. These are the conditions without which humans will not exist on planet Earth, so they require respect for the planetary boundaries, without which they can't get on with their own projects because they don't peacefully coexist, where their agency or autonomy is compromised. The conditions are where their agency is not compromised. We need certain conditions. It doesn't matter what our particular community privileges and values and identifies with. These are conditions that are truly cosmopolitan. No group of humans anywhere will flourish on planet Earth as a community unless these foundational conditions are respected. We'll either be enslaved or we'll go the way of the dinosaurs. These are conditions that are foundational. They have to be respected, this above all. In particular communities which form, then, of course, they will have their own particular fundamental values, like in the European Union. The Charter expresses the fundamental values of the European Union. We don't have something similar to that in the UK. Human rights is tentatively part of our fundamental values, but always under threat. So, but generally speaking, communities that express themselves through constitutions do commit to some fundamental values, which take priority over everyday kind of legitimacy and acceptability. So for those who are governing, there are three questions they should always be asking themselves about the legitimacy of what they're doing on their governance. One is, are we doing what we should do to respect and protect and maintain the foundational conditions for all human communities? Secondly, within our own particular community, are we respecting the fundamental values that we privilege above all in our community? And thirdly, are we doing as much as we can to try to achieve socially acceptable, a social license for the things that are permitted? So that's on the side of those who are governing. But as I say, there are responsibilities on the side of those who are governed, who are subject to governance, which is where, of course, the demand for respect usually engages. But I think one thing is that those who are governed should understand the limits of what law, particularly law-like governance, can achieve. That there are inevitably going to be some reasons for discontent, that your particular preferences or priorities will not always prevail. That you should respect the best efforts of those who do govern. And, of course, you should demand always that the fundamental values of your community are respected. A fourth bullet point there, I think I had this on the overhead before the Swiss women took their case to the European Court of Human Rights, the climate change case. But, yeah, those who are governed should always raise questions about whether the foundational conditions are being respected. And I'm sure we could have a very interesting conversation about whether we think the European Court of Human Rights got it right in accepting that it had authority and competence to engage with that kind of question. I think in non-ideal circumstances, that's a question you should be able to raise anywhere within the polity. And it's slightly disappointing to me that the Council of Europe, in its recent framework for AI and the rule of law and democracy, or whatever it is, don't really draw out more the significance of these foundational values, which lie beyond the fundamental values of particular communities, if you follow me. And those who are discontent with governance, of course, they're entitled to express their discontent, but the way in which they express it needs to be, again, mindful of the importance of peaceful coexistence, and that, if you disrupt that, then the possibility for your community to be viable and flourish is diminished. I understand where the reasons for discontent go up to the foundational conditions, then there are special reasons for thinking that, okay, some disruption can be tolerated. And now we come, finally, to the fifth conversation. Let me start. This is about the prospects for governance. Now, if you follow what I'm saying about the potential tension between law-type governance, law-like governance, and technology-led governance, then you might think the prospects for law's governance are uncertain. Law's project, they are uncertain. But you might, on the other hand, be more upbeat and think that this will all come out well in the end, that law will lay down the conditions for sort of minimum conditions for workable order, that ethics will be complementary, it will set higher standards, but be a constant kind of reminder that we need to be thinking about what the right thing is and doing the right thing. And technology, that will be integrated into law's project in a way that means that humans can do the law-like things better. They can perform better, with the tools which are available. It'll all end happily. That's one view. Yeah. But as I've said, that might be underrating the force, the momentum behind the drive towards a more technological approach, which diminishes the human centricity. Oh, dear. What's happened there? Oh. Hello. I'm not sure I lost. Oh, sorry, I lost on the screen there. Did that time up? I would hope not, because it's showing okay on the screen here, but...
Oh, that's, yeah.
Disconnect. Oh.
You know what to do?
Okay. Well, I think the yeah. Okay, I am finishing here. I mean, I think the technology must know. They didn't want to hear what I'm going to say now, because this is bleak. Because what I'm going to say now is that, okay, if in the foreground we have this tension between a competition between law-like governance as a project and the project of technology as governance, in the background, this is all going on in the shadow of, I think, threats to any kind of governance project, that whether you're thinking about governance by technology or governance by law, the future is uncertain. You remember that, I don't know the story about Enrico Fermi, who, you know, were colleagues at Stanford discussing the possibility there might be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, and well, if so, you know, why haven't we managed to talk to one another yet? Answer, well, it requires a great deal of technological sophistication to communicate across the vastness of the universe, and communities that achieve those levels of sophistication self-destruct before they can try to get in touch with one another. So, yeah, and back in the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes was, you know, in the interwar years, commenting on the thin skin of civilization. You know, there's volcanoes underneath there, things waiting to erupt. And more recently, well, in the last year, books by like Robert Skidelsky on the machine age and Mustafa Suleiman's The Coming Wave. These books, like a lot of trade books, which are, you know, quite apocalyptic in their reading of the runes here, that we have technologies, not just nuclear technologies, which are, you know, potentially highly destructive, but all manner of technologies, garage-type technologies, laptop-type technologies, you know, easily portable, distributed technologies that can cause huge amounts of damage. And there are a lot of angry people out there who don't seem to be vested in governance and civilization. So, in conclusion, you know, one of the books that goes along these lines by Toby Ord called The Precipice, the message in Ord's book is, well, you can see there, we are, he claims, in a unique period. I think it's always dangerous. Historians always say, oh, it's not quite so unique, you know. But we are in a unique period of human history, an era when there's an existential risk to the future of humanity. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say a ChatGPT is, even though it's frequently cited in that way, is the obvious example. But these are risks created not only by natural phenomena, climate change causing these things, but also by our own human practice and technological innovation. And the more we invest in technology for governance purposes, you know, the more tools we might be putting in the hands of people who are going to abuse those tools. So Ord argues that we need a multidisciplinary effort to try to understand the risks and develop solutions. But, you know, strikingly, although all disciplines seem to be invited to this project, law is not. There are some remarks about governance later on in the precipice, but generally lawyers don't seem to have any role to play. And I think this is absolutely wrong. Lawyers should be leading these kind of projects. And when I'm saying that we lawyers should be putting ourselves in a position of thinking about good governance, that's where we take our lead from. Okay? So the role of lawyers in the future is to try, whether we're in the law schools or in practice, whatever we are, is to try to contribute in our own way to improving governance, to making, you know, pushing us closer to good governance. Always going to be challenging, and protecting civilization. I don't think we lawyers should have to apologize for being lawyers, even though our reputation, you know, is not great. No, I mean, the kind of reputation that lawyers maybe have at the moment is perhaps deserved. But if we say, no, look, we are really good guys, good people, we understand the importance of governance for human civilization. Law is one project that tries to deliver good governance. It's not the only project, and our job as lawyers is to try to assess the best way involving law-like strategies or technology strategies to deliver good governance. That should be our mission, okay? And I wonder whether the arc of development in the next 40 years will take us somewhere along that. But these are the kind of conversations we need to have to kickstart that kind of thinking. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is working? Okay, great. Okay, thank you for giving us this intriguing perspective on this kind of helicopter view, overview of how things started, let's say 4 decades ago, and where we stand now in the confrontation of AI and all these other technologies that we're looking at. you clearly delineate actually several of the possibilities, the potential that law can give us in governing all of this, but also some clear restrictions. What we're going to do now, you can't hear it? Okay. What we're going to do now actually is give the floor to the audience to ask some questions, and then we move on to the panel in which Professor Brownsword will also be part of. So if you have any questions, please let us know, because we get to you with the microphone. Yeah? Okay, I see 2 questions over there.
I'll start. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I was interested in knowing a bit more, it's a spoiler of your book, but I see that both law, technology, and governance can be a source of privilege and oppression within society. And when aiming at good governance, good law, and good technology, if we want to use this term, have you considered this problem or this reality actually? And if no, why? I'm sorry, I work on gender law and technology, so I felt that I had to ask this question.
Yeah. Sure, Dan? Oh, thanks very much for that question. You know, before I published that book, I road tested the ideas in several places, like Vienna and Turin in particular. And when I kind of sketched the ideas in the book, and in both places, the first question that came up was, well, I don't know why you really think we could ever be content with law, because law is kind of inherently oppressive, exploitative. It's just, you know, law is an excuse for those who have the power and privilege to entrench and formalize their protection, legitimate the positions they already have. And you might want to extend that, not you know, in the way you've already indicated, to it's exploitative, it's oppressive. So why should we be trying to retrieve or, you know, make a case for law? Do you really believe it can be anything other than what it truly is? That's a very good question, but it wasn't the question I was trying to answer in the book. I was kind of making some favourable assumptions that law at least is well-intentioned. And I was particularly interested in trying to draw out the way in which technology, once it was on the radar, reshaped that kind of discontent and maybe introduce some novelties into the sorts of discontent we have. But, you know, a good point would be, look, we should never respect law. Why should we? It's just, you know, it's the other side. It's a class war we have here. And we can't, we just shouldn't. But all I'd say to that is that you don't want to jump from the frying pan into the fire, because if rejecting law's governance means that we open the way for more technological ways of governance, that could be even more dystopian and oppressive than what we already have. I suppose I do have some belief in the potential of humans to do the right thing. I'm an old-fashioned moralist, I have to say, but I think that the dignity of humans resides in their capacity to do the right thing, even when there is the opportunity to do the wrong thing. That's what it's about. Now, you might say, oh, you're just a romantic, you know, forget it. But I hear what you say. All I can say is I hear what you're saying, and there is a critique that comes from that sort of angle that you presented there that would say, well, I'm not sure, really, that we're tackling the right problem here. And again, though, I mean, if you think that we're in such a bad place that we need, you know, there is a view, isn't there, that a fresh start is required. But the fresh start, to get to the fresh start, that it involves extreme destruction. You know, it's after world wars that we can make fresh starts.
That's encouraging. There was another question over there. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for... Is it working?
Yeah.
Thank you for an interesting lecture. I was wondering, with regard to governance, I feel that you look back at law, technology, different forms of governance, and try to weed out what are positive and and negative aspects of different forms of governance to be able to kind of reconstruct the assemblage of these different possibilities towards the future, no?
Right.
But I was wondering, in your questioning of the different modes of governance, what is the role of climate change and destruction connected to the, in that sense, I would think, failing governance of actually quite old technologies. So I think nuclear is a very good example of something that I think was somehow governed maybe well. I mean, we didn't have global nuclear destruction.
Yep.
Maybe it was also luck, I don't know. But if we look at, for example, the gas and oil industries, just cars, planes, and things that are fully normalized and have been under a very intense governance structure, both technologically and legal. But I think there's many reasons now to question whether that was actually working at all, or not at all. Yes, there were elements that were working, but there are clearly also elements that were not working. And how does that, how does that relate to your overall research question in this book?
Yeah, thanks very much again. And well, I mean, I can't emphasize strongly enough how important these foundational conditions are. So, you know, they are the conditions which, above all, we must protect as humans. Whether we view that, I think, whether we view these conditions prudentially, that can never be in our interest to be extinguished, as it were, by compromising these conditions, but it's also morally required as well, because we owe it to one another. Or some people, of course, would say we owe it to future generations. You know, there's that debate as well. So those conditions, and you know, are the most precious conditions and the most important objects of our governance. We protect and maintain them. So, yeah, you're right that we want to try to assess whether our prospects for maintaining those conditions are better through law-like governance, through, you know, international treaties on environmental protection, sustainability, and climate change, or whether they are better through some sort of technological approach. Well, that would be one layer of questions. And I mean, you know, some of my colleagues in the Netherlands here, actually, they take the view that the environmental law is basically a failed project. And, you know, if you're worried about climate change, rules and conventions and targets are not going to do the job. So that we need more kind of technological approach and geoengineering sort of approaches to try to... I mean, some people would say we're already past the tipping point. It's already too late. All we can do now is just try to mitigate the damage. But that would suggest that technology is where we should be looking for, if there is a solution, for a solution. On the other hand, the more we invest in technologies, the more, you know, and the more thirsty they are in the resources they use up, the more we build the problem. I mean, the underbelly, kind of speak of resource consumption by some of these technologies, it doesn't really get out into the public domain very much. But, you know, there is a huge cost here in what's mined to make these things work, and, you know, and how emissions do affect the environment. So, yeah, we're caught between a rock and a hard place, probably. You know, that we don't like law-like solutions because they don't seem to work. Technological solutions we don't know, but they're very risky too. Things go badly wrong with that. But at the same time, the more we invest in technology, the more we seem to be adding to our problems. So, yeah, what's the answer to that? I don't know. But I mean, all I can say is that one thing stands out. If you want an Archimedean sort of vantage point on all this, it's those foundational conditions. And we've got to get outside our own communities where we think the Archimedean vantage point is in the Constitution and the fundamental values that we've committed to and recognized in our particular communities. No, it's beyond that. It goes beyond that, I think.
Thank you. I can imagine we have more questions, but actually we also have a panel planned now, so it's good to move on to that part, because then we can also address further questions to the panelists. For now, I'd like to thank you. I also have a small gift for you, which I've hidden here. So thank you for joining us and for giving this great lecture. We also have a gift for Hans, but please remain seated. I will give that to you later. Can sit over there. Please, for the panelists, come over here, and the moderation will be by Simone van der Hof. So please come over here. We'll install. We don't have a break. We'll have a break after the panel.